I was born in Summit, New Jersey, which is in the Watchung Mountains, at the hospital that my father was the chief surgeon at. But we lived in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, which is near Plainfield, Westfield, approximately about 25 miles south of Newark, New Jersey. We had, keyboards in our house. My younger brother is just like about a year and a half younger than me. He was a prodigy. He was an amazing, he just came out of the womb playing music. I mean, he could play anything. And the scouts from Juilliard School of Music came to our school because somehow word got out or whatever. And he started going to Juilliard School of Music on the weekends. And, but anyway, we had these keyboards. And so I taught myself how to play piano. I'd have to remember exactly what year, but I could think when I was 13. I was born in 1958, so you can do the math. I was playing in this band with some buddies, and I was playing this old Farfisa organ, and that was my first really instrument that I messed around with. And then in 5th grade, I played trumpet in the band, and that's how I learned how to read music, was through that. But the first band I was in, the first band I was in was called the Rubber Band. And I think I played a little bit of trumpet, but keyboards, and I had a friend that played drums, and this other guy, Greg Brainerd, who was a baritone horn player in our band, in our school band. He played guitar. And then we moved on and changed our name. I think we added one other guy, and we became Cremation was the name of our band, right? So we were doing some Alice Cooper, just kind of rock and roll stuff. And I played my first gig then at another friend's bar mitzvah. And I remember my first gig, I got paid $50, and we're still getting paid like $50 sometimes for gigs. But anyway, that was my first gig and the first couple bands I was in. And then it goes on from there. When I was in high school, I played in another band called Omega. We played a lot of school dances, and we played a lot of cover tunes, songs from the Doobie Brothers and the stuff that was going on then in the mid-'70s. And then there was a band that we loved that we used to go see that would win all the Battle of the Bands in our area. The name of that band was Orion, and it was a pretty big band. I mean, they had 2 drummers. They would bring like drum stages, and I mean, they were just a big production band. They had a sax player, 2 drummers. Then the bass player was really great. I can't remember his name, but Punky was the guitar player. He was a great guitar player, and they had 2 guitar players. Tony was an Italian guy that played guitar, and they just had some great stuff. They had their own apartment. They were all older than me. They were like 27, and I was like 16 and 17. But their keyboard player left to go be this, to be a plumber. And they had a keyboard opening it, and some gal in my class was, a groupie of them, for them, and she came to me, and she became my girlfriend after that. They needed a keyboard player, and they saw me play, I think, or something. I don't know. It was weird, but so they invited me to play, and they taught me a lot of stuff. They bought me a keyboard. They bought me a Fender Rhodes, and they had this apartment that had, full shower and big practice room, all insulated, and all their stuff was set up. It was like, wow, man, it was incredible, Anyway, that was a really good experience. I was lucky, and I think my whole musical time, I've been with people that were older than me that were really experienced, and they kind of took me on their, coattails. And so that's how I became a musician, really, was by learning from older people that had a lot of experience. And I was always the youngest guy in the band, in all the bands I was in up until fairly recently. Jug band music was one of the first forms of music that I heard as a kid because my older brothers were really into jug band music. They had their own jug band, and they would practice in their room. I remember going into their room like when I was allowed to go in when they were done practicing or when just one of them was in there. And I saw these, Jim Kweskin albums. And they had other albums. They had some old blues albums, and my oldest brother was really into blues. I think he went into New York City and took lessons from one of the legends. I don't know if it was Son House or Reverend Gary Davis or somebody like that in the 60s. So that was the jug band music. My first experience was that. And I didn't even know about, the Memphis Jug Band or the old guys that started it. It was just through this Jim Kweskin's records, and I thought that those guys had, when I was a little kid, I just thought that Jim Kweskin had invented jug band music, right? I thought he was like, okay, these guys came up with these, funny instruments that weren't really instruments, or that they played, because my brothers had like those slide whistles they would play and kazoos, and they had a washtub bass, and they played jug sometimes too, if I remember right. And my brother, oldest brother, played guitar, and the name of their band was Freaky Ferdinand of the Bush Country and the Boy Wonders of the Lonely Hearts Kazoo Club. That was the name of their jug band. And they had this like little red wagon that they would pull to their gigs. I mean, they didn't walk to all their gigs. They must have loaded. And in that red wagon was this toilet, that was a planter, and it had a tree in it, kind of a small little tree. It was like an evergreen tree, I believe. And it was, and they had a sign on it that said Arthur. And so that they brought Arthur to all their gigs, and that they set Arthur to the side and played. And I never did see them play a gig. They would go to the coffee house, and of course they don't want the young kids to go there. I probably wasn't allowed to go. That's where a lot of the music went down. It wasn't in bars, and people weren't drinking alcohol as much. I mean, they probably were in some places in their cars or, behind the scenes. And not even smoking marijuana very much, really. My brothers were not into marijuana too much at that time. Later on, of course, everybody had gotten into it. But then, of course, they went off to college, and my oldest brother continued to play music up in Maine, where he went to Colby College, and that's where he met Tim O'Brien, and that's where I met Tim O'Brien up there. He went to college with my brother. The famous mandolin player guy, and my brother did a lot of cool stuff back in the day. He traveled around jumping on railroad cars, jumping freight cars, and traveled to places with his banjo. He was really into playing the banjo. I didn't graduate then, but I finished high school, and I immediately came out to Hood River, Oregon, where my oldest brother was living. And I kind of looked up to him like my father, because my father had died when I was 11. But he was always gone, of course, traveling. He was playing music and working. And he got me a job with the Forest Service in Carson, Washington, working with the tree nursery there. And spent one summer, I guess we arrived right around the 4th of July, the summer of 1976. I was pretty amazed at how beautiful it was there compared to where I came from, snow-capped mountains, but it never rained all summer until October, when it finally did rain. But anyway, my brother was playing old-time music then, and I had pretty much played just rock and roll, and not much blues even, but of course blues was involved. My brother and I started playing music together, which we had never done before. I've always heard him play, and I was just playing guitar because I knew how to play guitar. I was backing him up on these. He was learning fiddle, and he was playing these fiddle tunes and old-timey tunes and stuff, and he played banjo too, pretty good, frailing style. And he had this old mandolin that was there, that he was trying to learn to play, but then he got lost interest in it, and it was just laying around, so I picked it up, and that's the first mandolin that I played, this old K plywood mandolin that I started learning to play mandolin on. That was 1977. But I didn't even know, it's a little embarrassing, but I didn't even know what a mandolin was, really, growing up, until I came out west, and my brother had a mandolin. I was like, oh, what's that? Because I never did listen to bluegrass like Bill Monroe or classical mandolin or any of that stuff, and I later in life I did really get into it and played in the Mandolin Orchestra and everything. But anyway, it was interesting that I was shielded from that, or I never saw that, what a mandolin at all until I was like 17 years old. I really all of a sudden really loved it. I think it was partly because it was easy to get, easy to play the melodies, easier than the guitar, I found. Because I had tried to play the guitar for a long time. Never took any lessons on the mandolin or the guitar until later. I have taken some workshops and lessons from John Reichman. I used to travel down to when he lived in the Bay Area and take mandolin lessons from him because one of my brothers lived down there and we would go there for Thanksgiving every year. So then I would book a lesson with John Reichman when he was living down there, and I learned some great stuff with him, a lot of Latin stuff he was into. And yeah, the mandolin, I just, for some reason I really took to it. He had it, nobody else was playing it. And so I started learning, like my first Weezer Idaho festival, my brother and I went, and I had this mandolin, and I was learning the fiddle tunes, and I couldn't, play all the fiddle tunes or all the notes, but I would just play along, and then, when I got to a place that I didn't know, I would listen, and then pick back up where I could, and I kept trying, and that's how I became to be able to play the mandolin, was by trial and error on these fiddle tunes, because those guys would play those tunes for hours, you know what I mean? So that's great. I mean, it's good for learning. So I was so inspired there, to play. Once I went there and saw all these people playing and just having a great time. But, and I saw a lot of stars there, people that, and I didn't know they were famous, like David Grisman was there one year, Vassar Clemens, but I didn't know who these people were. I saw them playing, just jamming in the tavern, and I was like, wow, this is like great, man. This is like, so life-changing for me. I had a magic thing happen on my first Weezer. There was a beautiful girl that came up to me and had this mandolin case, and I never met her before, and she goes, will you play mandolin? She says, I have this, nice mandolin here, and my father needs to take me someplace, and I'll be back later in the week. If you want to watch this mandolin, you can play it and everything. So it was a beautiful, I think it was an F4, maybe, Gibson, or no, it was actually a black face, I seem to remember, but this was back in '77. So then I had this beautiful mandolin to play, and I was, playing it all the time. I mean, I just couldn't put it down. I'd stay up until I could, pass out and then get up and play it again, So that was really something that pushed me over the edge, with the mandolin. And then, she came back right at the end. It was almost like a little angel because, everybody was packing up, ready to go out of Weezer, and I had this mandolin. I go, oh, no, what do I do? I don't see this lady here, this little girl. Where'd she go, And then she came out of the crowd or something, and took the mandolin away. And I was like, anyway, so that was sort of my, the thing that really, the first year that I played mandolin was when that happened. So I think that was something special. We formed a band called the Famous Potatoes there. And back then, a lot of camping was at the rodeo grounds, which was right across the street from Clifford's Tavern. And so we met some great people there. Some people from, we called them the Hoko Yokos, and they were from the Hoko River. They were had a little old time band. So how we became the Famous Potatoes is we had this old 1954 Chevy panel wagon that we drove to Weezer. It was a white panel wagon with no windows, so it was a cargo van kind of, and it had Famous Potato license plates. It was from Idaho, and somebody had taken decals and stuck these eyes all over this thing. So it was it was like a potato, right? So the names too, we sort of made up little nicknames. I mean, they called me Spud because I was the youngest kid. And back then, when I was playing, I was kind of, I wasn't used to being in front of people playing so much. And it took years, but I was always sort of with a bad posture, because I was just sort of embarrassed or just, I don't know what I was, stage fright. That's how I dealt with my stage fright or something, But they called me Spud, and then we were, after that, that name pretty much stuck more. This other guy, Jim Hagedorn, who was played a little bit of fiddle, a little guitar, and he also played hammer dulcimer later. His nickname was Chip, and that stuck for a while too. But the other names like Danny Clifford, who played a lot of French Canadian music, we called him Frenchy, like French fry. And then my brother, who was in charge of the band, he was the dictator, right? We left Weezer heading east. We went to Montana. We met this great guy, Steve Leach, at Weezer, who invited us to his place. So he was a really amazing musician, guitar, singer, but he also had a dummy with him, and he would do this act with this dummy and sing and everything. So we followed him to his place in Livingston, Montana, and he set up a gig for us, and so we played there, and that was our first gig. In Paradise, it was, in Paradise, Montana. And we had these other little groups that were with us, like the Hoko Yokos. They weren't Famous Potatoes, that was us, right? But they would come with us, and we'd play as the big string band, and and we just got basically food and beer and tips. Gas was cheaper back then, but we kind of pulled everything together, and then that's how we started. And then we went across to South Dakota, and our goal was to go back to Maine, where my brother had a lot of friends, and there was gigs back there. So that's what we ended up doing. We ended up traveling to Maine, and then that's when we picked up our fiddler, who was playing a lot of dances, those contra dances there, Danny Clifford. And then we came back to the West Coast. I think we came back in the fall, and then we with our bigger band with Danny, who's a great fiddler. I mean, he could play anything, So that really was a boost to us. And then we started. We came back to Astoria. I think we went to a barn dance in Clatskanie, and that's where we met Bob Poor, Banjo Bob, and Crabbo, and then they invited us to live with them in Astoria in this old farmhouse. And that was our base of operations there. And then we started playing in all the taverns and stuff around there, and up and around wherever we could go on the coast. And then we would get some other gigs. We used to play a lot at the Saturday Market in Portland underneath the Burnside Bridge, and tips and were good then. And we picked up this bass player who was kind of living in Portland, but he had Joseph Stevenson. He was a really good bass player. He played in this other bluegrass group before, so he had some good singing techniques as far as like singing some nice harmonies and things, and slapping the bass, and and that really improved our act once he joined up with us. And then the following year we went back to Maine all together with the bass player, which was great. But then he got us some gigs up in Canada, and we went up to Nanaimo and played for the Historical Society up there, and so that was great. And because we did have a gig there, we had working papers so we could cross the border. And then once we got there, we did our same old Famous Potato thing, where we went into every bar we could and played for tips, and met a whole bunch of great people, and learned a bunch of tunes, and that's what we did, basically. We used to we'd open up for the Rounders back then, even. And they would sometimes sit in with us. And the way those guys played fiddle tunes was different than we. We would play the 2 times each for dances, because we played square dances and things. And those guys just played the tunes because they put quirky words to them, So they would play tune. And so sometimes he'd jump up on stage and play with us, and it'd be like, well, we're on the other part already. And he's, Jim Kweskin did, like, for instance, Blues in the Bottle, his first version, he got from the Holy Modal Rounders. And then later on, he realized that there was an original recording of that, and then he changed his way he performs it because he wanted to do it more like the original. But as far as jug bands go, that we were playing some jug band music, for sure, but we weren't a jug band. We were a string band. And, if you notice, there's some, even Martin, Bogan, and Armstrong, they're not a jug band, but they play stuff that a jug band would play. Just not using those instruments, not using the jug band instruments, and I think that was for us too. I mean, occasionally we would play with a mostly a washtub bass player would be hardly ever a jug player, you know. Even though there was people that, you know, all play jug, like for instance playing blues with Johnny Ward. Well, he played jug, and sometimes for our little acoustic gigs, he would bring his little metal jug. But, you know, it was never really considered a jug band. You know, so that was the, you know, that's where I first heard jug band music when I was growing up, but I was never really in a jug band until I was with Fritz. I mean, he was the first really jug band I was in. In the 80s, one day I came back from Weezer, you know, after being gone a week, to my little cabin I had in Cannon Beach, one that I rented. And I think ahead of time, this guy, Jim Wilkins, who played guitar with another group I played with called the Lower Columbia Trio, he said, hey, my buddy Turtle is, you know, going to come live in Cannon Beach for a little while. He was playing with Dan Hicks at the time, and Dan Hicks was on another one of his going to dry out things, so they didn't have any gigs. So he came up from San Francisco, and he asked if he could stay with me, and I said, sure. Well, that was before I went to Weezer, and then when I got back from Weezer, there was Turtle on my doorstep playing guitar. You know, so I came back, and there's this guy playing guitar on my doorstep. And that's how I met Turtle, because I heard about him, but so then I easily, you know, of course, welcomed him in, and then he got a great job being a chef. He's a good cook at one of the restaurants there, and then got his feet back on the ground, and he got a place to live. And so we both lived in Cannon Beach at the time, and we started a band called Meloddity. And this is where the transition happened for me from old-time music, which mostly I played, and I didn't really play much bluegrass, really. I liked bluegrass, but I just couldn't get behind it. For some reason, I didn't listen to enough of it. So I was pretty much just an old-time music guy, and there was plenty of work. You know, I played a lot of music at Bill's Tavern in Cannon Beach, just playing old-time music with the Beerman Creek String Band. We had a regular gig there. When Turtle came along, I started learning these jazz tunes and stuff, and kind of a folk swing stuff, because this folky, the chords are a little bit easier to grasp, you know. It's like it was a good transition from there to jazz. But anyway, so Turtle started teaching me these tunes, and then we started playing together, and we made this group. Turtle had played in a bunch of like jug band-esque, you know, bands that weren't really jug bands. I mean, the Fly By Night Jazz Band was not a jug band. They were kind of a jazz band, but the bass player, he played the gut bucket, you know, to all these jazz tunes and stuff. So, and they didn't call themselves a jug band, but they did play some of the jug band tunes that our band plays, that the How Long Jug Band plays, even back then. So, and I've heard some of the recordings were great, and they were on the radio a bunch. And then I traveled with Turtle as a duo down to California, where John D. lived, the gut bucket player. And Turtle and I went into one of the bars in Bolinas, where we met him, and we played just like a jam, you know, Famous Potato style, where we put out our case, people threw money in, and we got beer and food, you know. Anyway, so that was cool. He played some great gut bucket. But at one point, when we started our band, Meloddity, we were playing 7 nights a week, just in the local area. I mean, we had a steady Sunday gig with a full band, and then Turtle and I would do duo acts at these other clubs. And that was pre-video. In other words, when they used to rent the VCRs in stores, and they had video stores back then when they had the VHS tapes and stuff. Right before that, we had those steady gigs. And then as soon as that happened, like up in Seaside, there was like a video store that started selling or, you know, renting movies. And at the same time, there was a rash of drunk driving tickets, and the cops were coming down on that. So I could see all of a sudden in the clubs and the places we were playing 7 nights a week, there was less people there. And so the gigs started dropping off. And then Turtle, I think, moved back to Portland at one point. And even though we did have some gigs together, Billy Holtz, the washboard player who played with us quite a bit, moved down to the beach, I think near when Turtle moved away. And Billy and I started playing music together, right? So there was a little bit more of a jug band feel. with washboard all the time. And then Billy and I started this newspaper. Mostly Billy and Gary Kasky started this newspaper called The Upper Left Edge. And at the same time, we started this music booking agency sort of thing where we bring talent from Portland or wherever else that happened to be coming through. Sometimes I would be in touch with John Reichman's brother, Steve Reichman, who was booking the Aladdin Theater, and we would get some acts down there. But anyway, Fritz was in this band called the Metropolitan Jug Band. We booked the Metropolitan Jug Band down there a few times at Bill's, and that's when I first met Fritz, and it was amazing. And he had this like crazy eyes, sort of like this real intense person, you know. So then that was, again, the next time I heard, you know, jug band music, because you know what it's like to be a musician and playing a lot. You don't get to go out and hear other bands play that much. But I got to hear Fritz play in his jug band, and I was just amazed. It was great. So anyway, that's how I met him. And then I think it was about a year later, maybe even, Turtle calls me up and says, hey, you know, this Fritz wants to, you know, start this new band. And he's asked me to join, and he asked me if I could think of anybody else. And he said, I thought of you to play mandolin. And it's going to be with Stu Dodge. I knew him, but we didn't talk. It wasn't, I mean, I guess we knew each other because we were musicians. But so that was the original band, was just the four of us. So I went for my first rehearsal with them at Fritz's house, and we went through all this stuff. He would play tapes, cassette tapes, and we started compiling this tune list. We do a bunch of, you know, we do some like Louis Jordan songs, Five Guys Named Mo, Mr. 5 by 5. Turtle was pretty much the lead singer. He sang most of the stuff. So we did Won't You Leave Me Here? No, yeah, that one. I'm Going to Germany. A lot of songs from the Jim Kweskin albums. We would play some rounder tunes as well. But we'd also, you know, Fritz always wanted to bring some new tunes in, and we would do jazz tunes, some jazz tunes. Because Turtle had a great repertoire with some of the jazz tunes. So Fritz was into expanding the repertoire into like My Blue Heaven. And he would pick some songs to play on the jug. We also did a lot of the old swing, like Sweet Sue. And that was one of Fritz's favorite, and he played a jug solo on that. And we would rehearse maybe once a month to improve our stuff. When we started rehearsing, then he said, okay, I'm going to get us a steady gig. So he got us a gig at the Laurel Thirst back in the early 90s. And we started playing as that four-piece group. We would travel to the coast and play sometimes, but that was pretty much our regular gig. I mean, we did do, I know that we played at the Portland Art Museum. We did play some little tours, you know. I mean, going down the coast, I remember we played some gigs down the coast of Oregon, and there was one time where, you know, Turtle and I, we went to go get some strings or go to the music store and look for stuff. You know, you have some time to kill. So we went to this music store, and Fritz goes, and this is when Billy Holtz actually joined us and played washboard with us on this little tour. And Fritz goes, well, come on, Billy, let's go to the hardware store. And that's where they went, because that's the kind of instruments they play, you know. They went to the hardware store to look for other stuff that could add to their, you know, whatever it was. So I thought that was pretty funny, you know. Fritz at the time, he was also busy playing with John Sebastian in the J Band, which is very much a jug band. And so he would go on the road. He did some recording and stuff with John Sebastian, and he would talk about John and his gigs and things like that. And then I was still living on the coast, which I have for years. So I would come up we played Tuesday nights. So I would come up on Tuesday nights, play the gig, and then drive back. I was sort of city phobic at the time, in a way. And of course it was nice to drive back at night. There wasn't any traffic. And I would be back down at the coast again. But, I was playing in other bands then. I was playing in the blues band then too, the Bond Street Blues Band. and I was playing in the Bierman Creek String Band still, doing some Bills gigs. The Floating Glass Balls, which was came after the Bierman Creek String Band, or when they stopped playing at Bill's, we started playing at Bill's. We started this jam session at Bill's is really what happened. And then the owner, when they were finally going to remodel, they said, you know, we don't want a jam, we just want a regular band. Can you guys just make a band? You know, so we made a band, and we called it the Floating Glass Balls, and they're still playing Thursday nights down there at Bill's as we speak. But anyway, I was doing that and other freelance stuff. My life sort of changed right there because I sort of fell in love with this woman from Puerto Rico who was an artist in Astoria, actually, and then she was going to be moving back to the down there to the Caribbean. She was actually moving to St. Croix, and she asked me if I wanted to come with her down there with her kids. And I thought that would be pretty cool. I was going to just go check it out. After I got down there, I looked for music gigs, and I found this one with this calypso band, Peter Desjardins. It was really great, and so I brought my dogs with me down there, and I moved down to St. Croix for about 9 months. There was plenty of work. They were flying us to the little islands right around St. Croix, the U.S. Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands. So that's where we were playing music. So for the time I was gone, they kept the gig, and they got Doc Stein to play the dobro in my place. So Doc played with the Barbeque Orchestra while I was on this 9 months hiatus. And then I came back, and they go, well, yeah, we want you to play, but we want Doc to play too. And so that's great, you know. So then our Barbeque Orchestra became a 5-piece. And then that was the last incarnation, you know, before Fritz got sick. And I remember like how we stopped playing at the Laurel Thirst. Then we just played casuals and things, you know, some weddings and other little, you know, festival type gigs till Fritz couldn't play anymore. And then, of course, you know, in recent times, when Turtle started a band kind of with his daughter, then it was just, that band kind of stopped. But then when Mary Flower wanted to pick up and have a band with her, because she's always playing solo, so she wanted something different, some of the people local, she asked us if we would play. So she sort of took the place of Turtle in that way, but instead it's Mary Flower and the Barbecue Boys. So just Stu, Doc, and I are the original from the Barbecue, and then we added a tuba player, and that's what's happening with that. That's where that, you know, Barbecue went. When Fritz passed away, they wanted to do a memorial for him up here. It was during the Blues Festival. Jeff Muldar and Jim Kweskin, they came up just together. And then they asked us to play with them at the festival. So Turtle, Stu, and Doc and I went and we had a couple rehearsals with them, and we played this gig, and they really liked us. They go, we really like you guys, you know. Then after we played that gig up here for Fritz's memorial, there was another gig that happened that they asked us to back them up on, and that was Chasing Gus's Ghost, which was a video, a movie, and they were having San Francisco had like Jug Band Day or something every year now. They have this, you know. So they asked us to play with them at the music hall, the Great American Music Hall, and in celebration of this movie. And so they're going to have all these people come. Of course, Maria Muldar, the members of the Jug Band were there, of the Kweskin Jug Band. David Grissman was there, and John Sebastian was there, and Dan Hicks, and we were the Jug Band that backed everybody else up. I mean, I got to jam with Grissman, David Grissman, and there's I can't remember what tune on there, but there's one there where you go back and forth. He plays something, then I play something. We go back and forth, you know. It's just like, wow, you know. And there's a recording of it. First, I thought, okay, it was great, because, you know, but they recorded it. But anyway, we did this gig. It was really great, and they treated us so well. We got paid really well. They flew us down and back, put us up in these fancy hotels in San Francisco, and it was like that was like the pinnacle of my musical career, I think, because, you know, here I was with all these guys, you know, and Bonnie Raitt was there. she came backstage and came up to me and told me I played good. She goes, "You played good." And I was like, "Okay, this is it, man. Bonnie Raitt said I played good. So this must be like, I can't get any better than this." Now I'm starting to, you know, go down with my career, right? Anyway, so that was just like the super high point. But then another thing that was sort of like the icing on the cake for that gig was a couple months later, Jim Kweskin calls and he says, "Hey, you know, would it be okay if we release this recording we made of you guys, you know, doing this gig?" And we were like, "Yeah, you know." And he says, "Well, you get, you know, like 2% royalties or something like that," which we've never seen, but that was great. And that was one of my best-selling CDs. In fact, I'm sold out of it right now. And then after that, that's when they asked us to do the 50th year anniversary. I think it was a couple of years after that. They said, "Hey, this is going to be great. We're going to be doing this 50-year anniversary, you know, next year, whenever it was. And if you guys come on tour with us for this, we're going to do a tour back east." And so we did. And then we had a great bunch of gigs where we played with Taj Mahal and the Carolina Chocolate Drops at this Rhythm and Roots Festival. And then we went around and played in back east in all their old haunts, you know, in Massachusetts, the Passems, and then we played at the Egg in Albany, New York. So that was really great, you know, and to work with those guys were so professional and very, the practices were really just right down to the point, getting everything down. So that was another great learning experience with those guys. One thing I tell people about is, you know, Jeff Muldaur and Maria Muldaur. Of course, Maria Muldaur became more famous, right, of course, in the big world, but Jeff is amazing himself, and they both are really great musicians. But they, you know, the reason why, you know, they got divorced is, who knows? I mean, they don't get along. But for this, they got together to play, and I noticed that how they were able to get along was thanks to Jim Kweskin being such a great band leader, and he put them in their place. He stood in between them at gigs, you know. And then, you know, Jeff would start, you know, bitching about Maria playing the tambourine or something like that, and Jim would just say, "Now, Jeff, it's okay," you know. And I mean, he would talk everything down and keep everything together so that nobody got all excited and ran out or quit, you know. So that's probably what he did during that whole Jug Band days before, you know. Later on, Doc did do some other work with them. He went down and recorded some with them, and then Jim Kweskin released another CD of his own that had some of the tunes that we recorded at the Great American Music Hall. So that's on yet another CD, which is great. And then he wanted to record a children's album, and he approached me, and I said, "Oh man, I'd love to do that." So I sent him some stuff, and then he said, "Oh, we lost funding, so we never did a children's album." But I got to spend some time with Maria Muldaur, and also Bill Keith, you know, was an amazing player and super nice guy, great guy to hang out with, very smart guy, super mathematician, you know, so he would relate everything to math, which everything can be related to it. When you go on tour with those people, you know, there's times where you go out to eat, you know, you just go have your lunch or breakfast, and then you just get into these great conversations, and that was really great to spend that time with them. This jug was one that was left to me by Fritz. I mean, he didn't personally give it to me. When he passed away, his wife, Cinda, was just trying to get, you know, and she moved away from that house because it was tough for her. But anyway, and I used to meet Fritz for lunch. This reminds me, I used to meet Fritz for lunch because he worked at he was a legal assistant for this law firm. Fritz is an amazing guy. Of course, he did all this stuff. I mean, we could go talk all about him. He worked at a toy factory. He was a recording engineer. But anyway, when he passed away and she was getting rid of stuff, she goes, "I want his friends to have, you know, some of his stuff." So he had a jug collection, of course, and big jugs and little jugs and everything. But this is one. When we went to his house, and she asked if there's anything there that you wanted, and I picked this jug out anyway because I thought it was cool. Memphis, Tennessee, Beale Street. So that's the story on that. Nice. Yeah. Fritz used to get those jugs and he would like, he'd boil water or something in them and he would put other stuff just to clean them so he could play them, you know, because they were all nasty, you know.